Mr. Secretary, sticking with the theme of sanctions, in February, OFAC licensed a U.S. company to build a factory at the port of Mariel, which, by the way, happened to be the port which Castro regime smuggled weapons to North Korea from. The venture at the Mariel port is with Almacenes Universales S.A., a company of the Cuban military. Cuba's Ministry of Interior, an arm of the Cuban military, is the most responsible for the brutality against the Cuban people. So how does permitting companies to partner directly with the Cuban military promote the Cuban people's independence from Cuban authorities, which is the stated policy goal of the president and that you've talked about as well?
So, Congressman, I would have to go back and look into a specific license. I think that the general objective of opening ports, opening shipping, having air traffic and commerce within the confines of our law proceed is about building more economic contact.
Mr. Secretary, and again, I apologize for interrupting, but I get that. It sounds nice, but you're dealing directly with the Cuban military. How does doing business with the Cuban military, let's not talk about theories. Let's talk about not what you talk about, what you say, what the president says. What you are doing is authorizing business directly with the Cuban military. Here's my question. How does doing business with the Cuban military help the Cuban people be independent of the Cuban military and its authorities?
I'm not going to address the specific license.
In general, how does doing business with the military help the Cuban people?
If the transaction you're talking about is facilitating shipping in and out of Cuba, and one of the things we do is we ship agricultural products to Cuba, and hopefully we'll be shipping things like communications equipment to Cuba, that helps the Cuban people. That's a kind of support for the Cuban people.
Mr. Secretary, this is not the only instance where you have permitted doing business directly with the Cuban military. And again, that goes against what the president said, and it's just, it's again, how can you justify doing business with the Cuban military as a way to help the Cuban people?
We have never said that Cuba's system is where it should be. The question is, how do you cause Cuba's system to change? We believe that by building more ties between the American people and the Cuban people, between the U.S. economy and the Cuban economy, we are more likely to change Cuba's system than a policy that has failed for 50 years.
All right, on that point, what Congress has codified into law in a very strong bipartisan way was basically asking for a number of things in return for sanction relief. And you know what those are. Free all the political prisoners, some basic freedoms, freedom of press, independent labor unions, political parties, and then start the process towards elections. I'm assuming that you support those concepts. Now, here's a question. That's what Congress insisted on before sanctions there was sanctions relief. What has the administration got? Because the administration didn't insist on any of those things as a condition. So what specifically has the administration gotten for the sanctions relief that it has given to the Castro regime?
I think, we can go back and forth.
No, I'm just asking for, I'm actually asking for specifics. What have we gotten back?
We are trying to change the relationship between the Cuban people and the American people. We're trying to set a foundation to be able to have change in Cuba.
So what are you asking back? What are you asking for?
We are increasing the contact between the U.S.
What are you asking for, though?
The American people. That is.
You asking for anything?
There have been a number of reforms that the State Department has worked with Cuba.
Can you tell me what are you asking for, Mr. Secretary? What are you asking for?
So
not in theory. What are you asking for specifically? What are you insisting on? We talked about. You just spent a lot of time talking about demanding things in return for sanctions relief of Iran. And we can argue whether it's enough. What are you asking for in return?
If you look at the Cuba policy, it is the exact opposite of Iran. We didn't have the world with us putting pressure on Cuba. We were the outliers, even in the Western Hemisphere. There isn't a country that I've talked to in the Western Hemisphere.
Mr. Secretary, for a long time, everybody did business with South Africa, and I think you would disagree that doing business with is a good thing, whether you're an outlier or not.
I'm not going to defend the policies in Cuba that need to change. The question is, how are we most likely to...
And what are you asking for? Wait, what are you asking for?
We believe that the process of increasing people-to-people contact...
But, Mr. Secretary, when you're dealing with the military, that's not people-to-people.
But if there's more information, more communication available, if there's more contact...
With the military? With the military,
When-
with the oppression system.
It's not,
Mr. Secretary, I have just 9 seconds left. Mr. Secretary, just
It's
very
not the
quick.
military
You were
who
part of the
control-
OMB, you were part of the OMB and also National Security Council during the Clinton administration. Were you involved in the negotiations with the North Korea deal, nuclear deal?
not directly.
Well, I just hope that you do a better job, and this administration does a better job of that when you were dealing with North Korea, and give all those promises that they were not going to have nuclear weapons.
Comments that Mr.
Thank you.
Diaz-Balart